I'm going to record on this computer. Okay. Hi, everyone. If you're just tuning in, I'm David McGuire. I am the director and founder of Shark Stewards. We are a nonprofit based in Berkeley, California with the Earth Island Institute. We've been around since 2006, and our mission is to save sharks and rays from overfishing and the shark fin or wildlife trade, and protect critical marine habitat. So we try to apply education like this, active engagement, including diving or in the classroom or in the field doing beach cleanups, and apply that passion towards conservation policy. So we work with the power of the people and the power of the shark and ocean lovers like you to protect sharks that we love. So today's talk is about California Shark ID, and I want to welcome all the divers, and we have some future divers, hopefully that will dive with us both in La Jolla Cove with Waterhorse, including this weekend, October 15th, 2022, but also in other California marine protected areas, collecting data and putting that into either the California BioBlitz, the California Coastal Assessment, and the database in iNaturalist with the California Academy of Sciences, where I am a research associate. So this talk is about California Shark ID and the incredible diversity and wonder of California shark species. This is a great poster that's on the Channel Islands National Marine Sanctuary, a little bit to the north of San Diego, right off of Ventura, Santa Barbara, the south central coast, where the sanctuary has higher protections and also a really high abundance of a confluence, kind of the more subtropical species with the more temperate species that we see farther north. And many of these species do cross those boundaries, as I'll talk about in the sort of adaptations section of this talk. So we do have an incredible diversity of sharks, skates, and rays in California waters. And that's partially because we are on the west side of a continent that experiences the phenomena called coastal upwelling. There are only 5 major zones on the planet that have this confluence of physical features that create this, combine the strong winds, the cold coastal currents, and the rich, nutrient-rich deep waters that come up in the spring and the summer because of the strong northwest winds and Coriolis effect, and that creates upwelling, which creates plankton, which creates forage fish, which begets the bigger fish, which begets the apex predators like white sharks, or the filter feeders like the basking shark. I want to invite everyone to our event this Saturday. We're doing a dive on the Waterhorse. There's Mike Bear, our board member, and the Ocean Sanctuaries Project in La Jolla, looking at 7 gill sharks. And also we'll be working with the Walter Munk Foundation at Kellogg Park doing the ocean awareness event. So if you're a diver, we have a few slots left to go out on the Humboldt with Waterhorse on Saturday morning to try to get some community science observations and data points in our Shark Watch program, and to see some of the sharks I hope that we're talking about tonight, but also to join in the education project where we'll have a booth at Kellogg Park at the La Jolla shoreline, where the Scripps map is located that was funded by the Munk Foundation, but also it's the unveiling of a bronze sculpture and also the unveiling of the map, which is this interactive exhibit, which is a mosaic, but also with QR code information for any species, many species, I should say, from the kelp to the rockfish to the sharks. And there are many species. It's a beautiful exhibit and a lot of great information. But also I'm excited, this is their first ocean awareness event. It's a dedication of this foundation for the Ocean Plaza, Education Plaza. So if you want to join us tabling, Mike and Maria will be manning the booth. I'll be there after the dive with several of us on this call and others, and it'll be a great day on the ocean in La Jolla. So I just want to start with a little video showing some of the sharks of La Jolla Cove. This is kind of an old video, but Becky Kagan shot, and this was on another site that she shares the video with. It's probably shot in standard def, no color correction. But it gives you an example, or maybe this is her style, of some of the more common sharks that you're likely to see if you visit the La Jolla Cove. If you don't know the species yet, I will let you know what they are and how they relate to other species. Is that playing okay? Thumbs up. Great. So you can see a lot of the several species of elasmobranchs in La Jolla Cove just in the shallows. You can see the surge there. This is just off the shoreline. Could be off of the Marine Room, which is one of the favorite spots of divers to go see the leopard sharks, but also other rays like bat rays, like stingrays, like the shovel-nosed guitarfish that we first saw. And you can just free dive and see these shark skates and rays. So it's really a fun place. There's this little aggregation there that's become quite popular of gravid or pregnant females who are just gestating, milling around those nice, calm, protected, warmer waters, but also protected from larger apex predators, such as seven-gill sharks. And so they kind of cruise around in the shallows and eventually pup or give live birth. So leopard sharks have this remarkable pattern that helps camouflage them. But like other species of sharks, this pattern is actually unique to each shark. It's really a gorgeous shark that lives in estuaries and embayments, but also along the coastline and the rocky shoreline, from about British Columbia down to Baja California. So really fun. There's a shovel-nosed guitarfish, which is a kind of ray. I don't know if you're bored or excited, but it is really fun to get in. There's an example. They have this spot and bar pattern that's saddle marks that are highly unique in the shark world, and really one of the prettier sharks off of our coastline, as well as being extremely gentle. They have small crushing teeth. Their primary food is clams, siphon, fatty innkeeper siphons, clam siphons, crabs. They'll eat dead fish or small fish if they can catch them. So they are pretty omnivorous, which also makes them pretty successful. So they're pretty successful animals. They're highly protected, not highly protected. We don't really care so much as a commercial species. So they're not involved in large scale commercial fisheries. They're mostly in inshore waters, so they kind of miss being caught as bycatch in the offshore gillnet fishery off of California. They don't get caught on long lines because they don't go into open water, and they have a nice little niche. One of their biggest impacts probably is pollution, because they are a nearshore species, and we know this because of bioaccumulation of mercury and other organic toxins, which definitely can have some impact upon their reproductive success or even survival. So the title of the talk today is, what is a shark? And well, we typically know what this is, the great white shark, Carcharodon carcharias, because we hear about them a lot in the news, or because of Jaws, or because of Shark Week. They definitely are the most heralded species of shark. They're the most in the media, they're most in the news, and they're the most whatever stimulating to humans who see them because they can be dangerous. But it's not the only example of a shark or a shark morphology or ecotype. Great white sharks are a carcharinid shark in the Requiem family. I'm sorry, they're in the laminate family. But they are a large shark, of course, with that fusiform body, large muscles, strong fins, big powerful tail, big teeth, large eyes, alert predators, highly adapted with many sensory toolkit, or much of a sensory toolkit. But they're just an example of this huge group of elasmobranchs, which is the class that includes the rays, the lantern sharks, the other different families of diverse types and places in the ocean that they live. The thing that makes them in common is that they are all cartilaginous. They are chondrichthyan fish, the class Chondrichthyes, of which Elasmobranchi and the holocephali are subclasses. And that means their whole backbone and their appendages are composed of cartilage, which is the same tissue at the end of our nose and the end of our ears and between our joints. And the benefit is it's lighter than water. It helps them float, or less dense than bone. That helps them float. It's also highly flexible, and also can have the rigidity, almost support structure of bone, particularly in the jaws and in the ceratotrachea of the fins, that support mechanisms that actually have mineralization in them, which is why the jaws in particular fossilize where the rest of the cartilage doesn't. So highly adapted, many vertebrae. White sharks have around 133. We have about 33, and that helps them become not only lighter, but extremely lithe or extremely agile, which helps them when they are tracking their prey. Of course, they have large jaws that help them as predators. Spiracles, which are a form of nostril, they have, or a form of pump for their gill system, not a nostril. They have distinct nostrils. They have a highly acute sense of smell. Sharks also have an electromagnetic sense, the ampullae of Lorenzini, large gill structures from 5 to 7 that help them take the oxygen from the water. In some cases, like the white shark, the laminate sharks, and many of the Requiem sharks, these sharks do have to swim to breathe. That's why they swim around with their mouths open, so that fresh oxygenated water can flow past their gills. But most species of sharks don't have to swim. So it's a bit of a myth that sharks always have to swim or they'll die. Many species of sharks, like the leopard shark, like many species of the rays, of course, the nurse sharks, there are a lot of sharks, white-tip reef sharks, that have something called buccal pumping, where they pump their jaws and bring in oxygen that exits out of the gill. So they bring it in through the spiracle and out through the gills. Sharks also have these specialized fin structures, which are highly different between different families and particularly different genera or species of sharks, depending on what their function is, whether they're a predator, like a white shark that goes after fast-moving fish or marine mammals, or if they feed on the bottom, or if they feed on carrion, or whatever their specialized feeding niches, their morphology is adapted to that ecological niche. And a lot of these come out of our book, Sharks for Kids, these images, which is a science book. It's a junior explorer's guide that we published last year, and it talks about families and adaptations. It's directed at kids, but I've been told it's great for people who don't have a science background. Sharks, of course, have a very sophisticated and highly adapted anatomy and physiology. They've been around for about 400 million years as a chondrichthyan race of fish, if you will. I'm just going to let Rick in. And so sharks have adapted specialized functions that help them survive in their ecological niche. So of course, again, the laminate sharks or requiem sharks, the fast swimming, what we think of as sharky sharks, have these large musculature along the dorsal surface, given structure by those several vertebrae, 130 or so vertebrae, is particularly around the jaw region. They actually have jaws that can disarticulate. So the lower jaw is not attached to the cranium and can actually open really wide, particularly so in the goblin sharks, which can actually evert their jaws past into their nose or their rostrum. Sharks also, of course, have an extremely large liver, or especially the big sharks that use this also as a floating function, because they store the fat in there, which is a high energy source, particularly, again, the white sharks, the makos, that feed on blubber-rich prey like whales or pinniped seals and sea lions. They can store a lot of this oil-rich, fat-rich oils in their liver that actually helps them float, and also serves as their battery, as a storage organ for fuel when they make these long migrations. I can't go into every adaptation, but I will talk about a couple really spectacular, unusual adaptations that are a little bit more unique to the elasmobranch shark world. But one particular adaptation is shark skin, which is composed of what are called denticles, which are actually small teeth. So if you look down at the corner here, or an electron micrograph, you can see that these are actually rigid teeth, which provide laminar flow. So they have heads and tails. So if you pet a shark from head to toe, watch out for his jaws, but it's very, very smooth. But if you pet a shark from tail to head, it's very rough, and you can actually cut yourself or abrade yourself in the case of sometimes near misses or bumps from the larger sharks. Native Americans, Hawaiians used shark skin as sandpaper for their canoes or implements, also as even armor. So it's very tough, which helps protect the shark from its predators, but it also provides not only the laminar flow, which gives it a higher percentage, as much as 10% reduction in drag, so it expends less energy, but it also prevents biofouling or parasites from growing on the skin. So sharks actually look very clean relative to many other fish, for bony fish, for example. This diagram from Shark Trust shows also the ciliation form, the sharky sharks or the galliform sharks, but also the batoids, which is a closely related group in the elasmobranchi to the sharks, and the chimera, which are the holocephalans or the ratfish. We do have a couple species that off the continental shelf primarily. The holocephalans are very, very conserved. They've been around for hundreds of millions of years. They're slow moving. They're generally solitary. They can live thousands of feet deep. They primarily rely upon biological mana to come down from the peak of the surface waters and feed on either dead whale falls or other dead things that come to the bottom. They have extremely large eyes that are highly light receptive. They have an organ called the tapetum lucidium, which is shared through convergent evolution by vertebrates on the terrestrial side of the ecosystem, like cats and dogs. So if you see that eye shine when you shine your headlights or a flashlight on them, that's to actually magnify and direct light towards the retina. So that's an adaptation that you'll see primarily in the deeper sea sharks or the sharks that live in deep waters and come up to shallower waters, like the seven-gill. They have these beautiful green eyes, but also the holocephalans, which never see the light of day in their lifetime. So Sharks have also a pretty sophisticated reproductive tract. This just shows a cutaway, but in particular, many species of sharks have two uteruses or uteri, which come out into a common orifice, not an anus. It's called a cloaca, which is also convergent to birds and reptiles. So it's a common orifice where they actually defecate through, urinate, but also it serves as a birth canal for the female sharks. Sharks actually have ovaries, and many species have internal eggs that can either hatch internally, or actually they can have fetuses, if you will, embryos inside that are given live birth. Some sharks also lay eggs. I think that's in the next slide. Yeah, so the reproductive strategy is many sharks, like the reef sharks, in this case, gray reef sharks, copulate. The males will typically grab onto the females by their pectoral fins or by around their gill areas. Quite often they'll turn them over so that the females, which are typically larger and tougher and scarier to the males, to induce this comatose-like state called tonic immobility, TI. And so the female sharks will ideally be a little more passive. The males have a specialized fin called claspers. It's a penis-like structure that actually will inseminate the female. And then typically this is brutal, short, and quick. And the males swim away as fast as they can. And quite often in reef shark aggregations, there'll be many males trying to compete to copulate with the female. And it doesn't look very pleasant for the female. And interestingly enough, at times, the idea is that the most dominant male will be able to inseminate the female, but sometimes several different males will inseminate the eggs. And so that female clutches can actually, or clutches is not the right word. I don't know what the right word would be. Females will have litters, I suppose, of larger, of sharks that have a diversity of genetic material, which in turn actually gives them a better survival rates, having greater genetic diversity. But some sharks are viviparous, meaning the young develop inside the mother with or without a placenta. So some sharks are actually more like mammals. They actually nurture their baby through a placenta and through also other fluids. Some are aplacental, but they're born live and fully developed. After a fairly long gestation period ranging from anywhere from a year to 3 years. The oviparous sharks are the sharks that lay eggs outside in a hard egg case, and those are only one embryo. You can see it if it's backlit, and often we see those in La Jolla Cove along California in the kelp beds. You'll see the swell shark. They look like mermaids' purses, and they entangle in the kelp, and the baby nurtures on an egg just like a chicken. Or the horn sharks, which have kind of a spiral egg case, which augurs down into the sediments until it is able to emerge as a fully formed little shark. And then there's a combination, which is actually the most common in the shark group, of ovoviparity. So the sharks have eggs that develop internally, and then they hatch, and then the pups are birthed live. So in the case of, for example, tiger sharks, they lay eggs internally. The eggs come down the uterus. The first ones that hatch become the most dominant or the most robust. They'll often eat their womb mates and intrauterine cannibalism, and sometimes the eggs before they even get a chance to hatch, called oophagy. And so those little sharks are getting bulked up and they're coming out tigress. They're really ready to come out, and they're very healthy. So their womb mates and this higher fecundity of these some sharks, it's a strategy to actually produce stronger offspring. So really much more sophisticated in many ways than, for example, a rockfish, which just the females spew out a bunch thousands or millions of eggs, and the males that kind of come around and spew out millions of sperm in what's called milt and hope that the two will meet. And some small percentage of those millions or even billions of inseminated or fertilized eggs actually are able to hatch into a larval form that will make it to adulthood to repeat the cycle. So the family tree of sharks, again, going back to around 420 million years ago, when the first chondrichthyan sharks started to appear in the fossil record, have branched out, and many branches have already gone extinct. Some, like the hexanchiform sharks, the 7 and 6 gill sharks, are on their way out. Many species are extinct, and including many genera are gone. So they're just kind of going the way of the dodo naturally until humans came along. They're being accelerated somewhat, unfortunately, like many species of sharks, by humans. But this group of chondrichthyan fish are split into the holocephalans, which are the ghost fish or the rat fish. You can see they're very basal from the original split, as much as 400 million years ago. And then the elasmobranchi, which include the scaleiforms, the galleiforms, and the batoids. And the batoids are broken up into the rajiforms, which all are modern rays, stingrays, and skates. And so the branch just keeps going, and I don't show that whole detail. But what we consider the sharks, the sharky sharks, are the fusiform, faster swimming shark that looks more like what we consider a shark, are in these 8 different families. So if you look at this Shark Week mini graph, thank you Shark Week, they're increasing some of their science besides talking about shark attacks. There's actually more, it's closer to around 500 species of sharks, but including 8 families: the squatiniforms, which are the angel sharks, the pristiophoriforms, which are the saw sharks, not the saw fish, which is a ray, the squaliforms, which are the dogfish, which have many species, almost 100 species, the hexanchiforms, which are the 6 and 7 gill sharks, but also the frilled shark, which probably, it looks like through DNA, belong in their own family. A very, very conserved basal species of shark, not primitive, highly adapted for what they do in the deeper sea, highly functional, and have lived through 5 great extinction events. So something's working well for them. And then we go to what we consider the more modern sharks, like 50, 60 million years ago, which would include the carchariniforms, which include the requiem sharks, and the laminiforms, which include our fast-swimming mackerel sharks, like the makos. And then also the erectolobiform sharks, which are the cat sharks, the carpet sharks, the wobegongs, the zebras. Many of these are tropical species, smaller, slow-moving ground sharks, really beautiful sharks, actually quite ornate. And the heterodontiforms, which include our own California horn shark, which we hope we'll see when we go diving in La Jolla Cove. They're really cute. I forget how many species, around 7. The one in Sydney is quite famous there. What is the Sydney bull shark called? I forget now, but they're really cute little sharks, and they have kind of a plate-like mechanism because they eat echinoderms, like sea urchins, but also mollusks. So they've got these sort of plate-like structures. Port Jackson shark, that's what it was. So you can see these sharks have radiated out, but nothing near like the bony fish or the teleos fish, which after the last great extinction event, there was enough of an ecological niche open in the oceans, and including warming oceans, that the bony fish have radiated into over 30,000 different species. So this shows the egg case, again, coming out of our book, Sharks for Kids. You quite often find these. You can see that little embryo of a thresher shark, just like the chicken and the egg, and then they kind of chew their way out and emerge live. Sharks have many acute and sensitive adaptations, including an electrical magnetic sense in their snout. Many have a very highly developed sense of sight, including the white sharks, which are a highly visual shark, which will actually spy hop and visualize outside of the water. They have a highly acute sense of smell and hearing, well over a mile or more, some cases possibly 3 miles. This shows those pores, the ampullae of Lorenzini, which are pits filled with a gel substance, which is an electromagnetic receptor and amplifies the signal and sends it through this network to the neural system, to the brain, which can detect small, like as much low as a nanovolt or a billionth of a volt of electricity, such as what our hearts put out into the milieu. So they can detect heart rates in rays and skates or halibut in the sediments. They can also detect if the animal's in distress or if their heart is beating more rapidly. And they can home in on that. This shows some of the dentition of sharks, which is highly specialized. So this is a bat ray here, Myleobatus, which is in the Myleobatidae. So this is our manta ray, you will, because it's a mobile array, but they have these, they don't filter feed, they have these crushing plates that allow them to scarf down crabs and clams. Also, the hound sharks have these kind of like more smaller teeth. They're actually so in fine rows, which also can crush animals such as smaller clams, but especially crabs and small fish. So their dentition is actually adapted towards, again, towards their food source. If you look at the larger sharks, which have this reinforced cartilage mechanism that supports this large musculature around their jaws, it's called a symphysis. It's actually a bilaterally symmetrical jaw, but each jaw on large sharks is specific to the shark and what kind of prey that they go after. So, for example, Asurus oxyrhynchus, which is short-finned mako, lives off our coast. A very fast swimming shark has these real pointy, long, slender crowns that penetrate their prey, particularly the ones at the apex, at the front end, and at the bottom jaw at the very, and they actually are tilted backwards, and they'll snag their prey, fast-moving prey like a tuna. Seven-gill sharks have more a comb-like structure, and these actually look very much like a tiger sharks. Their teeth are not they're not hobodontic. They actually have variated or not asymmetrical, but unique teeth depending on where on the jaw it is, and they have a different function. So the top jaw has these pointier teeth that plant into the prey, which are typically pinnipeds, and then more saw-like teeth on the bottom jaws, and they'll actually use their large tail and kind of corkscrew a big chunk of the seal out or dead whale. Seven gills are a slower moving shark, so they need to get into carrion or get lucky and get a slower, stupid seal and take a big chunk out of them. So quite often you'll find these teeth, because these teeth are always emerging and replacing themselves on a conveyor-like mechanism. So sharks don't need to go to the dentist. They feel with their teeth sometimes and they lose them, but are always replacing them. So diversity of species, I won't get into too much of the details other than we have a lot of sharks in California that are really cool. And sometimes they stay here year round, and others, like the salmon shark, migrate annually from the warmer waters south all the way up to Alaska, and they follow their favorite food, salmon. And quite often they will actually exhibit pigmentation from the salmon. They'll have kind of a little bit of a pink margin down on their ventral surface. They have a unique pattern as well. And the difference between a white shark and a salmon shark, they look very, very similar. These are a laminate shark. Their dorsal fin is a little more rounded, and their pectorals are a little more rounded. They do have a little black spot, but not quite as pronounced as a white shark does on the ventral side of the pectoral fin. But this white margin goes higher up into the gill, towards the gill plates. And the margin is a little bit more pronounced in white sharks, where it's a little lower down. And they do have that lunate, that or heterocercal lunate tail. Their head's a little pointier. but they're quite often mistaken for juvenile white sharks. They don't get nearly as big, but they do get up to about 9 feet. But we see in the San Francisco Bay, people will say, oh, there's a great white shark in the bay. And I'm like, show me a picture. Typically, it's a salmon shark. Of course, there's Isurus oxyrhynchus, which we just saw his jaws and teeth, the fastest moving shark in the shark world. They can swim up to 30 miles an hour. They can have spectacular leaps. You'll see them come out of the water. They can go down to almost 500 feet hunting prey. Typically, they hunt tuna, sometimes marine mammals, up to 7 feet, couple hundred pounds. They're favored by fishermen as food source as well, and they are almost fished out of the Atlantic. They are considered endangered, and they're also in the family of sharks that we are trying to protect under the Convention of International Trade of Endangered Species, because they are among the most highly coveted for their fins for the shark fin trade. Blue sharks, of course, like one of my favorite sharks, the shark of my youth, and these sharks are now disappearing. These are one of the most abundant large sharks in the world. It's now estimated, one study, 20 million a year in the Hong Kong shark fin trade. There just aren't enough sharks to sustain this demand. They're a beautiful shark, typically gentle, mostly will ignore you. They're hard to photograph. This gorgeous indigo color, sometimes they're, which are very cryptic. So they have counter shading like most, at least the most pelagic sharks. They're dark above, pale underneath, which helps them camouflage themselves from predators from below, because they're looking up towards the sun, which is bright. So that white ventral surface blends in. You look down, that dark dorsal surface will blend in with the depths, and that either hides them from predators like an orca for white sharks, or from prey like seals if they're looking down from underneath. So this is an adaptation that many bony fish have as well, like bluefin tuna are counter shaded, swordfish are counter shaded as well. Thresher shark, we have 3 species. This is another commercial species. Very easy to identify. This is Alopius vulpinus, the common thresher, which is in a commercial fishery off Southern California. These fins are highly coveted both for trophies. That long caudal fin, that upper lobe, is often used for display. Also, fishermen like to nail them to pilings near their boats. They're highly acrobatic. They use this to propel them at high speeds, but also to actually turn and shock or slap their prey and then come in and consume, in this case, reef fish, because they do live in the shallows, but all the way up into the temperate zones where we are in California. A filter feeding shark, the basking shark, which lives off of Monterey and sometimes San Francisco. This shark is endangered, soon to be critically endangered. It is a filter feeder like the whales, but it takes large gulps of water, hundreds of gallons, and then shoves it past these modified gill rakers that captures the prey, typically larvae or small fish like anchovy. These get up to 45 tons and feet. They're large, slow-moving surface dwellers, and their fins can go for $40,000 for restaurants primarily in Hong Kong and China. So these sharks are disappearing around the world, but also eaten as food in many cultures. They're typically a temperate, cool water shark. There's a nice population off of in the North Sea off Ireland, which is becoming increasingly a tourist attraction. This is the broad-nosed seven-gill shark, the star of the La Jolla Cove. Notorhynchus sepidina has that beautiful spotting pattern. This is the focus of the project of ocean sanctuaries that Mike and Barbara started, that we're trying to engage divers in as well, to take photographs and enter into this database and do pattern recognition ID through this algorithm. Seven gills are in the Hexacormidae. They're a 7-gill shark. Most sharks have 5. They're related to the 6 gills, which also live off our coastline, but typically in deeper water, which are stouter and don't like generally to come into the shallows, but they do come up the trench or the La Jolla Canyon. They also come into the San Francisco Bay where they're probably hunting other sharks. They eat other elasmobranchs like the rabbitfish or the ghost fish. In deeper waters, down to 6,000 feet. Seven gills get down to more like 1,500. They will live off the continental shelf, but they will also come into shallow waters and embayments, and quite often pregnant. So they're in there gestating, just like the leopard sharks, feeding, but also nurturing their young to give live birth. There's the six-gill shark, that big green eye, more lobe-like fins, like the seven-gill shark. Neither one has a full body image, but they also only have one dorsal fin, which is unique in the shark world. Most have two. They have a fairly strong caudal fin where they can accelerate, but they're generally a very slow-moving sharks. They like to live down in the depths around pinnacles and drop-offs. And again, they love to feed on other elasmobranchs, other rays and skates and the chimera. A very common shark in a large and very successful family are the Triachidae, the leopard sharks, of course, that beautiful hound shark that lives near shores, but also in kelp beds and rocky shoreline, does quite well in California. Recreational fishermen, particularly many ethnic cultures, like to eat them and catch them off piers. I like to look at them. They're a really pretty shark. And their cousin, the soupfin, the unfortunately named but aptly called soupfin, named by our Chinese immigrants during the 1800s, when the Chinese were brought over to work in the laundries or on the railroads or serve as laborers, also had successful fisheries, including China Camp in San Francisco, and they favored this shark for the dish of the emperor, shark fin soup. They're also called school shark or taupe sharks. They can live down to about 2,000 feet. They can get up to about around 6.5 feet, 7 feet, 100 pounds. They're also caught on piers. They're a beautiful shark, sometimes confused with blue sharks. Very gentle, and also we see these in the cove. More of a benthic or bottom shark are the cousins to the leopard shark. Not nearly as pretty, but also co-inhabit or coexist in that ecological niche in sandy and muddy benthic habitat, hunting primarily for invertebrates, but also octopus, which is an invertebrate, but also vertebrates like small fish. So these are the two smooth hounds that are common off our coast. A weird shark in the Hexaphormidae, which probably will be broken out in the Caladamuschelaceae. The frilled shark, which has 6 gills, which is why they're probably lumped in, but look entirely different. They're much more slit snake-like, which is what Anguinus, that's the genus Caladaesolacus is. These are a deeper water shark. Typically, if we see these, they're dying or sick. There have been a few captured for a short time off of Japan and Okinawa and put into the aquarium there and studied for a few days, but they don't survive because they are a deeper water organism. Again, flaccid bodies, but they have these sharp teeth, hundreds of them that are backward oriented to hang on to prey, typically a deep water species that will also migrate vertically in that great vertical migration that occurs from the deeper sea up into the edges of the photic zone called the deep sea scattering layer. The prickly shark, we've been seeing a lot of these being caught over COVID in our Shark Watch data mining, looking at social media. Echorhinus cookii, and they're called Echorhinus because they actually have this really rough skin, and they're cousins to the rough skin shark that have been harvested historically, but are harvested in the Atlantic for leather for their skin, but also for their livers to provide the cosmetics industry, primarily oil called squalene. And that's a molecule that was used as a substitute for vitamin A during World War II, when we almost fished out our 7-gill and soupfin sharks. They have recovered, but it's interesting to see this primarily slow-moving deeper water shark come into the shallows at night. So they're nocturnal foragers. They're kind of a weird shark. Their dorsal fins, they have two dorsal fins, are that are fairly symmetrical in size. And again, the fairly flaccid fins, pretty slow movers, acclimated or adapted to deeper, cooler waters, but we see them in the shallows. As we do the spiny dogfish, which can live in large schools, thousands of feet deep. These are a large scale fishery, both for their oil, for squalene in the Atlantic, but also for their meat, which they're sold for as fish and chips. So if you're in the UK and you're eating fish and chips, you're not eating cod, you're probably eating spiny dogfish. Many species of shark are actually sold under a different name, a euphemism, like whitefish. I'll call them hake sometimes, which is a type of flatfish. So they're misidentified because people don't want to think they're eating shark. But a lot of them, like the angel sharks, for example, which were fished out commercially off California and are still severely depleted, have a good tasting, firm white flesh that many people like to eat. White sharks were also fished commercially in the 70s, 80s, up to the early 90s, almost completely fished out. And a lot of those made their way into the ceviche, the fish tacos in California were mostly great white shark. These sharks are still harvested off British Columbia. They're one of the largest, most abundant schooling sharks. They are called spiny dogfish because they're a squaliform shark. So they are in this a large family that were first described by Pliny the Elder, actually. And we called all sharks then in the 15 or 1600s dogfish, but they had this spine in front that fishermen hate because that snags in their nets. These are typically a deeper water shark, but we see these come into the embayments also, like the San Francisco Bay, Elkhorn Slough, in the Monterey Bay and south to give birth, to pup. And fishermen like to catch those to catch other sharks. So here's the Pacific horn shark, cousin, and looks very much like the Port Jackson shark in Sydney Bay. They like living in shallow waters and bays. You can see their dentition there for grasping on to small fish or also crushing urchins. They're a slow-moving shark in the Heterodontidae, meaning their teeth are not alike. And they have this little ridge over their eyes, slow-moving, really cute shark. The only way this shark would ever bite you is if you handled it. They have these nasal palpae, these folds here, which help them find their prey on the bottom. So it helps intensify their sense of smell. Oops. Swell sharks, they're swell because they gulp water. These are a very successful group of sharks. This family is really large from the deep sea into shallow waters. And they have this beautiful camouflage coloration and patterning. They have a large green eye. They will grab on their tails sometimes if disturbed by a predator or a diver, which please don't do that. And they'll gulp up water and balloon out, which is why they're called the swell shark, and perhaps look bigger than they appeared, or sometimes they'll actually wedge themselves into little rocky areas and they can't get pulled out by their prey, which sometimes includes sea lions or other sharks. They lay these egg cases that we find in the kelp beds and on the beaches. And they're actually one of the few sharks that kind of vocalize. Most sharks are silent, silent killers, if you will, besides the crunching of their teeth. But these sharks actually, when they exhaust that water, kind of make a barking sound. And angel sharks, really beautiful flat sharks, so a transitional morphology. They're called angel sharks. So if you look at them from above, they have these kind of wing-like fin structure that are not quite fused to the head like the rays, but they are becoming fused. You can see the anterior surface there of that pectoral fin is still kind of distinct, but it is more fused than other sharks, so it takes up a large part of its body mass. They are ambush predators. They burrow into the sand, but they also will forage nocturnally above the sediments or rocky habitat. But they can spring off this asymmetrical tail like lightning at night as their prey happens to wander by. They also have these sensory barbels that can help them sense prey as they feel around in the dark when they're foraging nocturnally. These sharks are global, many different species, I think 13. They're disappearing because they're a favorite food source. They also get entangled in nets as bycatch. Some of them can get up to almost 100 pounds, 9 or 10 feet is so, and can live down to hundreds of feet deep, but also in shallow bays like Bodega Bay, muddy habitat. And they also will hunt for species like perch or in the kelp beds. So they're a really beautiful shark. And if you get to see one, you're really lucky to see one. And then we saw in the video at the beginning, Rhinobatos productus. This is one of our 3 species of guitarfish. They have a very symmetrical 2 dorsal fins. They are also a burrowing shark. They're in the ray, the Batoidae. A beautiful, they're called guitarfish because they look like a Fender guitar, but don't try to play with them. Again, they're benthic, and like other rays, their gills are on the ventral surface of their head. But again, using that spherical pumping mechanism, they're able to intake air and exhaust it so they don't clog their gills with the mud and sediments. And they're very happy living completely burrowed and camouflaged. Their cousin, the thornback guitarfish, which looks entirely different. It's a different genus. And it has this rigid kind of thorny protection strategy. They're rounder, more like a stingray, but they don't have a stinger. And they're actually pretty placid. You'll quite often see these if you dive at night. And then the bat ray, which is one of our more common rays, again, a primarily benthic forager, but you will see them in the water column, flapping their wings, flying like a bird. I love seeing these. They'll actually fly over the bottom and bioturbate or disturb the benthic habitat, the sediments away from their prey, which can be worms or crustaceans that are burrowed into the sediments, and then they'll scarp it down. And also you'll see these holes all over Catalina where they'll hunker down and actually camouflage in these burrows that they produce. Again, these are cousins to the mobula rays, the 2 species of manta. And these we see sometimes in other parts of the world, primarily farther south, will be killed for their gill rakers to be sold as traditional medicine in the traditional Chinese medicine trade. Urobatus halleri, this is common. The round stingray, this is one of the most common. If you step on it, it whips its tail back and will give you a venomous sting. It really hurts. They are benthic, and they will come into just a few inches of water. So in the summertime, in particular of Southern California, you have to do what's called the stingray shuffle. Shuffle your feet to disturb them so that they won't sting you. One of my friend's kids got stung. He was surfing and he jumped off right on top of a ray, and it whipped his tail and stung him. And the lifeguard, it's called Stingray Bay, saw us. I waved at him. He drove his truck over, automatically fills the stingray bag with hot water and puts his foot into it because that hot water will denature the protein. And the California torpedo ray, which is actually an electric ray, and it lives in shallow habitats, but down to the drop off as well. It can create an electrical current, so it will arch its body around a fish and stun it and eat it. And it can induce quite a painful electric shock of not quite 100 volts, but 40, 50 volts that can actually stop people's hearts if they have heart problems. And the big skate, which lives off of the continental shelf, but which will also come in. This is the largest of the skates and rays that come into the shallow waters. They can get up at well over 100 pounds. They're generally very peaceful. They have a different shape than the rays. They have that more pronounced snout. Again, also the fused wings like the rays have, a flatter, longer tail. This is Binoculata that has these 2 large spots. It's pretty easy to identify. They have a distinction that their egg cases are very large, 3 or 4 centimeters, maybe 5 centimeters long, and can have as many as 4 or 5 young embryos in that egg case. That's unusual. Most of these egg layers only have one egg in their case. You can learn more about these species and others. I haven't gone through all the sharks, skates, and rays. There are many who come into the waters, including a whale shark that was spotted this summer off of Dana Point. Typically, that's a tropical species. We have some more unusual, more temperate or boreal sharks that might come down in cold water in winter months. But if you want to download our science sheets that are being produced, you can help if you're a volunteer, do research, and we put together these sheets as information sheets, and someday going to compile into a guide. We have about 30, I think, including we've been focusing on many of the species that we want to protect, but also so that people can download them and learn about many of these sharks. So that's under our education tab under Shark and Ray Science Sheets. There's the URL down there at the bottom. One of our programs is to teach people, but also to learn about human behavior, including catch, is Shark Watch, which we started during COVID with UC Berkeley students, where we started mining Instagram, Facebook, YouTube for fishermen doing bragging rights on catching sharks, including protected white sharks. This guy in particular targets many large species of sharks, but he caught this shark and he brags that he released it and it was still alive. And it was probably exhausted, but also it has completely maimed by a gaff and may have imperiled this shark. We have many data recordings of people catching 7-gill sharks in particular that are gravid, that are pregnant, that are being killed before they can give birth. In many cases, the sharks are not eaten, they're thrown away, all for a trophy or a picture. We feel this is unsustainable as well as cruel, and have advocated to California Fish and Wildlife to regulate chumming and using heavy gear on California piers and beaches. They just passed a law that actually partially got there, protecting white sharks. You cannot chum for white sharks. You cannot attract white sharks or have heavy fishing gear fishing for sharks if you know white sharks are in the region. Well, it's kind of a stupid law because we know white sharks are in the region year round if you're south of the Southern California Bight, or seasonally if you live off of San Francisco and some of the foraging areas like the Farallon Islands. This is just showing some of our data of catch that's been caught primarily on California beaches and piers in Southern California. And you see a lot of large species are being targeted and being either caught and released or caught and maintained, and including several of these smaller species, which are also eaten by people who are augmenting their food source. So the shark regulations that we would like to implement is a public health safety regulation that would avoid attracting large sharks near piers and beaches. It would avoid white sharks accidentally biting people, but also would help protect protected sharks. So we're trying to provide this data so there would be better management. And we're doing a lot of this by Shark Watch, which is an app that you can download, a QR code. You can test your shark knowledge, but you can also provide your photography that we can run through, like Mike's program with the 7-gill, but also with leopard sharks, also tiger sharks in Hawaii. But a big part of it is so people can learn that there are sharks here, that sharks are super cool and want to learn about sharks and want to see them alive as opposed at the end of a hook. So we're trying to put these posters up around, particularly in bait shops, in locations on piers and beaches. If you do know a store around you, please download this and ask, like Waterhorse, it has it up in their store. The dive shops, of course, want to see this because divers love to see sharks. And for us, it's a way to engage divers in long-term conservation as well as education, so that we can avoid this, a white shark being dragged up a pier and severely maimed on a gaff. So this is some of the education program. We're working with Chris Lowe, the Cal State Long Beach Shark Lab. They will be at the Run for Sharks October 22nd at Newport Beach, providing information. But Chris has done a lot of the white shark research, his lab and students, not only on white sharks, but also rays and other species, but also putting up signage and trying to support protection of sharks. So there's our QR code if you wanted to take a snap of that, or it's on our website or the signs. So here's our quiz for those of you paying attention. You can put your answer in the chat. This was submitted to our SharkWatch program. What is it? So this diver took a picture, a video. This is a frame grab. And, it looks like it definitely is a local shark. It's actually one of our requiem sharks. Anybody? I think it's a soupfin shark. He thought it was a blue shark. I'm pretty sure it's a soupfin shark. Mike, it has that very triangular dorsal fin. Blue sharks tend to have longer pectoral fins. Their eyes are a little larger, but they do have a very similar body type. It's hard to tell in the video, but blue sharks are also very blue and a little paler underneath. So he thought it was a blue shark. I'm calling that a soupfin shark. So I guess, California has many species of shark, but we don't have a state shark. So if you were going to put a shark on a flag, what would you put? The state vertebrate anyway, or the state predator is the grizzly bear, which is on the California flag. The state fish, saltwater fish, is who knows? The Garibaldi. And the state, who knows what the state freshwater fish is? Put it in the chat and you'll get a prize. It's the rainbow trout. So beautiful animals, right? Rainbow trout, grizzly bears. But what about the white shark? Should we petition the state of California to have a state shark? I vote for the white shark. Charismatic, enigmatic, really is a symbol. And it should be like the grizzly bear, a symbol of strength, a symbol of unity, a symbol also of an animal that really does not live on the entire planet. And like the grizzly bear, was severely threatened. And now, like the grizzly bear, is starting to rebound in our state waters. So we're starting a booster. We're going to print these t-shirts. I'm not quite sure if this is going to be the color, but if you want to get a California Shark Republic and help us support, but if you want to vote for your other sharks, you can. We're going to hold another Zoom at large. This one was by invitation, where we have people from other sides of the planet and the United States, and we do a little quiz and more interactivity. But we're going to vote for a state shark, and we might be able to get this implemented under the California legislature someday. So you heard it first right here on our Shark ID Zoom. It's been over an hour. I don't want to belabor the marine protected areas too much. We can't belabor them enough because 71% of our planet is ocean. There is the United Nations initiative to protect 30% by 2030. SDG 14 at Aichi, Thailand, the last meeting of the United Nations to protect oceans voted to 10% by 2020. We did not reach that. We have around 7.8% protected under marine protected areas, reserves, sanctuaries. It's 90% of the habitable space on Earth. It's most of the species, most of the phyla live in the ocean, not on Earth, and yet we've protected very little. The United States, we've protected around 26% in our sanctuary and monument system, which are federally regulated. We have 4 off of California, the Channel Islands in the south, Chumash Heritage, which is proposed to be the 5th off of Big Sur, connecting the Monterey Bay, which was the first in 1971, the first in our sanctuary. We're now celebrating 50 years of our National Marine Sanctuary System. The Cordell Bank, which is kind of amoebaed or embraced by the Greater Farallones off the San Francisco coast and connects to the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary. So by connecting these, we will be able to protect our coastline from mostly bottom trawling, which damages the bottom, but also oil exploration. It protects habitat, and it also protects swimways. It does not protect fisheries, so fisheries are protected under the Fisheries Act, and also our state waters in our state protected areas. We're also working directly in Hawaii to not only encourage the continued protection of the Papahanaumokuakea, which was our first marine national monument, but also to make a national marine sanctuary there, which will provide more funding for NOAA to do research, marine debris removal, because tons of fishing nets are being washed ashore on these islands, which are actually haul sites for endangered species like green sea turtles, like the monk seals, and the tiger sharks, which use those islands to forage and also get pregnant. And then those females come down to the main islands where we've been working in Kona, documenting tiger sharks. So the Big Sur coastline, which is a gorgeous area, lightly developed. It's a national wilderness area, national park, but the waters are not protected. Some are in our California Marine Protected Area Network, which encompasses 16% of our state waters, 124 individual state marine reserves, conservation areas, recreation areas, and special closures. These link through the currents, north and south, all the way from the Oregon border down to San Diego Tijuana border. They are already working. In around 10 years, we're seeing increase in abundance, a return of species that were almost hunted out by recreational and commercial fishermen like the sheep's head. But we can't protect these species from viral incidents, from perturbations like sea surface temperature increases, like we saw the blob. But what they do is provide resilience. So we see that our MPAs that don't allow fishing have one less major impact introduced by humans. So we're seeing the species that were perturbed or disturbed or crashed, like our ochraceous star, like our Haliotis, like sea, not urchins, which are having another problem with warm sea surface temperatures, but abalone, and that fishery is completely closed off in California now. I just gave a talk to the Orange County Underwater Photography Society and talking to some of these old timers, which I think we're becoming one, some of us. We used to see the rocks used to just be covered with abalones. You could go out one free dive and get your limit, huge abalones, and now you cannot harvest any. And they're slowly coming back in some areas, but many species that used to be common as early as the 80s are now threatened or endangered. So these are the Southern California MPAs, regulated by the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. And there are about 50 from Point Conception down to the border. The red areas indicate no fishing zones. And if you look at all that area of state water, it's not a large percentage of ocean protected. There was a lot of griping and complaining about the fishermen who want everything to be open, but they also, many of them, these fishing clubs, recognize that a lot of these areas are overfished and they want to see the ocean recover and rebound, like rockfish, like many of these species that we love to eat, but we've eaten too many. So many of the blue areas are called marine conservation areas. The Channel Islands themselves are actually a very unique area of study, but also management. They're within a national marine sanctuary, so they have federal areas, conservation areas, but also state marine protected areas, which are the red. Those are no-take reserves. In the pink, and there are state marine conservation areas. Sorry, the state marine conservation areas that are pink are also no-take. The state marine reserves are no-take. The blue are state conservation areas, which allow some limited take either seasonally or recreationally. And so going all the way south, you can see San Diego has a nice representation, including one of the earliest off of the Scripps Pier, and also down off of in La Jolla Cove all the way down to the river mouth. One of the areas actually has been redesignated, the Matluhuayal. Sorry if I mangled that. under Native American, has cultural significance as well. So many of our marine protected areas also have cultural significance, and our sanctuaries actually have cultural protection, like the Papahanaumokuakea and like the proposed Chumash National Marine Sanctuary, which if you want to follow us on our website, we are collecting signatures for the second public comment period. So with your joining us, you'll be joining us there in La Jolla Cove, in the Matlahuayal State Marine Reserve, looking for marine species that are protected, like giant sea bass, like our Garibaldi, like rockfish, but also hopefully seven-gill, soup fins, leopard sharks, swellfish, and many of the same elasma ranks that we're talking about tonight. So name your elasma rank. You can download this really cool graphic from the Channel Islands National Marine Sanctuary site, and we'll bring some with us to Walter Munk Ocean Awareness Day, October 15th in La Jolla Cove, and celebrate sharks because it's Sharktober. And we call it Sharktober because the white sharks return from their migration each year. So up north, we have the large white sharks. Down south typically are the juveniles, where they're pupped, the young of year, where they're born live, and then the subadults, and they move north. We also are seeing smaller sharks move north because of the warm sea surface temperature, but we've been seeing the older, more robust, the big sharks. So this was Tom Johnson. This was the early photogrammetry as opposed to biometrics, where we're looking at photographs from still photos, comparing that dorsal edge of the trailing edge of the dorsal fin. This is Tom Johnson, first identified by Scott Anderson and tagged by Peter Pyle in 1993. Tom reemerged after a disappearance of a few years. We were worried that he might have got caught in a longline during this big, magnificent migration. But he returned and was photographed in 2017. He had to be an adult, and they mature at around 12 or 15 years. So Tom is probably almost could be as old as 50 years old. So well, happy birthday, Tom. We hope to see him again on our Farallon tours, which I lead each fall. We've held two. The next one's October 23rd out of San Francisco, and we have a permit with NOAA to observe and photograph sharks using a decoy, the only one that's been issued. This just shows some of the magnificent migration these sharks have made, including the white sharks that go as far as Hawaii, but also to what's called the White Shark Cafe. Sorry, I thought this was animated. It's kind of a bad shot, but these clusters show a density of tagged sharks that by the time March comes around, they're almost entirely gone from the Northern California coastline, and they're out here milling around, diving for giant squid that's been recently discovered, also probably reproducing. And then by the time summer months, there are no great white sharks. This big 15, 16, 17 mature sharks are coming out, milling around, and then they start returning and peak in October, where there are very few out in the Central Pacific. And that's when we see them at our foraging sites, like the Farallon Islands, which have high densities of fur seals, of northern fur seals, of northern elephant seals, which are the primary prey, but also California and stellar sea lions. So the other thing that Shark Stewards does besides do this and educate and try to engage people is protect sharks through policy globally, because 100 million sharks, it's estimated, sharks and rays are killed per year, primarily for the wildlife trade, but also as bycatch and food. We're killing too many. It's estimated that 71% of all the biomass of oceanic sharks and rays are gone. So if there are 10 people in the room at a party and 7 left, that's how many sharks and rays would be left. We're getting to the point where many species are functionally extinct, and they have an incredible impact on the health and diversity of their habitat. So when sharks go, they also lose a lot of the functional diversity and functionality of ocean ecosystems, largely through shark finning and the shark fin trade and the gill raker trade. But we're seeing increasingly that sharks are having major benefits. They're more valuable alive than dead. They're blue carbon sinks. They're regulators of blue carbons. And in the case of tiger sharks and seagrass beds, which are a source of blue carbon. They support healthy ecosystems, increase diversity and functionality of ecosystems. So sharks are much more important, particularly to us as divers, but also to people who fish, because the prey fish do better, ironically, perhaps, in areas that have apex predators and mesopredators like sharks than they do in areas without sharks. So saving sharks can save the ocean. It might even help reverse climate change, or at least mitigate it. So by protecting large amounts of biomass as living biomass and allowing them to die and sink to the bottom and replenish and fix that carbon, as opposed to taking it out and allowing that carbon to exhaust into the atmosphere, we might be able to create these carbon sinks, as well as supporting habitat like seagrass beds, which actually can store up to many times, orders of magnitude higher than many terrestrial ecosystems. We're working on reducing this harmful fishery off California. I just got some news, unfortunately, from lobbying in DC last week that this is probably not going to advance until the next term. Congress is sitting on their hands, and we fear for a change in the Congress, in the House in particular, that may be more pro-fishing, less conservation oriented. But we hope this bill that actually has passed through the Senate will pass through the House and ban this completely harmful and the last drift gillnet fishery, which is killing thousands of sharks and other species each year. You can learn more about that at sharkstewards.org. We have several petitions you can advocate for, you can sign and share, that we can share with your lawmakers. You can share our work, hopefully, with others. Volunteer like you are, share on social media. You can help us fundraise, write. We really need help in social media development, grant writing, and developing our Shark Watch program in Southern California. So thanks for listening to the Shark ID program. You can dive in with us both in La Jolla this weekend and other times through the years. Join us at one of our events, Newport Beach tomorrow, our Run for Sharks on the 15th, and our fundraiser, Arts for Shark Party. And you don't have to attend. You can buy a piece of original art online and help support our work going to CITES, the Convention of International Trade of Endangered Species, in Panama this year, where Shark Stewards is developing science development, science kits, science lobbying materials with the Shark Research Institute to justify protecting over 75 species of sharks, including the entire Carcharodonid family, protecting endangered gray reef sharks, protecting blue sharks, which are high in the shark fin trade, and also many are lookalike species, all of the Sphaeronidae. So not only the great and scalloped hammerhead, but also the smooth and the bonnet head. And those guitarfish we saw, which are getting killed for their rays because they are running out of large sharks for shark fin soup, and they're starting to fish down the food chain, including the giant rays, but also the Rhinobatidae. You can learn more about our CITES work. Hopefully look for updates when I'm in CITES. I'll be there lobbying for 2 weeks, hoping to come back and say that we did it. And it's some estimates that if these species are listed, we may have reduced the shark fin trade by as much as 75%. So I want to thank you for listening, particularly my sponsors that support Shark Stewards financially, especially Lush this year and NOAA, Patagonia. And please follow us on social media. And again, thank you for your help, for watching Shark Stewards, for learning about California sharks, for joining us at events, and mostly for loving the ocean. So I'm going to stop the recording now